For 183 days, Kang Min-jae had not spoken a single word. Not when the doctors asked whether he remembered the men who shot him. Not when detectives placed photographs of 3 dead bodies beside his hospital bed. Not even when his uncle leaned close and whispered that the woman responsible for destroying his empire was finally dead. The doctors said there was nothing wrong with Min-jae's throat. The bullet had missed his vocal cords. His lungs were healing, and every medical examination showed that he was physically capable of speaking. But the man's soul, once called the Silent Wolf, had locked his voice somewhere no doctor could reach. For 6 months, Min-jae remained inside a guarded rehabilitation facility overlooking the Han River. He refused visitors, ignored his attorneys, and communicated only by writing short instructions on a black notepad. Leave. No questions. Turn off the television. People assumed his silence was another form of intimidation. They were wrong. Kang Min-jae was silent because the last time he trusted his own voice, a woman died. Then, on the 183rd morning, an 8-year-old girl walked into his room, carrying a scratched red music player. She was small enough that the identification card around her neck reached her waist. Her dark brown skin was damp from the rain, and her thick natural hair had been arranged into 2 braided puffs. A yellow backpack rested against her shoulders. Min-jae did not recognize her. The girl recognized him. She stared at the scar beneath his left eye, then at the black notepad resting beside his hand. "Are you Kang Min-jae?" He gave no response. A nurse attempted to lead her away, but the girl pulled free. "My name is Zara Mensah," she announced, "and I came because my mother said you would remember this." Min-jae's fingers stopped moving. Zara removed the music player from her pocket and placed it on the table between them. A strip of faded tape had been attached to its back. Written across it were 4 words. "Play this for Min-jae." His expression changed. He knew that handwriting. Min-jae reached for the device, but Zara pulled it away. "Before I play it, I want you to know something." Her voice trembled, but she forced herself to continue. "My mother disappeared 6 months ago. The police said she was probably dead. Your uncle said you were the man who betrayed her." Min-jae's eyes hardened at the mention of his uncle. Zara pressed the button. Static filled the quiet room. Then a woman began singing an old African lullaby, softly, tenderly, as though she were comforting a frightened child during a storm. Min-jae froze. His breathing changed. The room disappeared around him. For one terrible moment, he was 7 years old again, trapped inside a locked orphanage basement, while thunder shook the windows. A young African woman was holding him against her chest, singing that exact melody and promising that she would return for him. He had waited. She never came. Min-jae had spent 31 years believing she abandoned him. Now, her voice was coming from an 8-year-old girl's music player. A tear moved down the face of the man who had ordered executions without blinking. Zara watched him carefully. "You remember the song?" Min-jae's lips parted, but no sound emerged. The lullaby continued until Grace's singing suddenly stopped. There was a pause. Then her recorded voice spoke directly to him. "Min-jae, if Zara has reached you, then your uncle has already tried to silence us both. Do not trust the story he told you about the night I disappeared." The recording crackled. "And please protect my daughter. She is carrying the truth that could destroy everything he built." The message ended. Min-jae stared at Zara. His hand shook as he reached for his notepad. He wrote a single question and turned it toward her. "Where is Grace?" Zara's eyes filled with tears. "I thought you knew." She placed 3 more recordings on his table. "My mother said each song would lead us to the next place. But I don't understand the sounds hiding behind her voice." Min-jae looked down at the recordings. One contained the lullaby that had comforted him as a child. The other three might reveal what happened to Grace, and why powerful men had spent 6 months trying to keep her daughter away from him. Before we return to the night Kang Min-jae lost his voice, subscribe to the channel, and tell us where you're watching from. Because sometimes the voice capable of exposing an empire does not belong to the most powerful man in the room. Sometimes it belongs to the mother who sang to him when he was only a frightened little boy. And sometimes the person brave enough to make him listen is her 8-year-old daughter. 6 months earlier, Kang Min-jae still possessed a voice that could silence an entire room. Men twice his age lowered their heads when he entered. Business owners crossed crowded restaurants to greet him. Politicians who condemned organized crime in public accepted his envelopes in private. At 38, Min-jae controlled hotels, shipping companies, private clubs, and warehouses throughout Seoul. Some of the businesses were legitimate. Others existed only to hide money and move illegal goods. He had inherited most of it from Chairman Kang Dae-hyun, the uncle who raised him. Dae-hyun taught Min-jae 3 rules. Never forgive betrayal, never reveal weakness, and never trust anyone who claims to love you. Min-jae obeyed those rules for most of his life because he remembered what happened the first time he trusted someone. He had been 7 years old when his parents died in what he was told was a traffic accident. Before Dae-hyun claimed him, Min-jae spent 4 months inside a private orphanage outside Seoul. The building looked respectable from the road. Behind its locked doors, frightened children slept in overcrowded rooms while the owner collected money from families seeking illegal adoptions. Min-jae fought the other children, insulted the staff, and refused to cry where anyone could see him. Then Zara Mensah arrived. She was a young Ghanaian university volunteer, working with a church group. She noticed the bruises the orphanage staff tried to conceal. She also noticed the quiet Korean boy who had food beneath his mattress because he did not believe another meal would come. During a thunderstorm, Grace found him locked in the basement as punishment for attempting to escape. She wrapped her coat around him and sang a lullaby her mother had taught her in Ghana. Min-jae did not understand the words, but he understood the way she held him, as though he was a child worth protecting rather than a problem that needed controlling. Grace promised she would return with help. 3 days later, Chairman Kang Dae-hyun arrived and removed Min-jae from the orphanage. Grace never came back. Dae-hyun told him she had taken money from the orphanage owner and returned to Africa. That was the day Min-jae learned his uncle's final rule. People always leave when the price is high enough. 31 years passed before Grace walked into Min-jae's office again. She was no longer the young volunteer. He remembered. Silver touched the edges of her natural curls, and an old press identification card hung from her neck. She had become an investigative journalist, known for exposing corruption across borders. Min-jae's guards attempted to stop her. Grace walked past them and placed a photograph on his desk. It showed 5 African children climbing out of a refrigerated delivery truck registered to one of his shipping companies. Min-jae studied the photograph without touching it. What do you want? The truth. Truth is an expensive thing to request in this building. So is silence. Her answer made 2 of his guards step forward. Min-jae lifted one finger, and they stopped. Grace looked at the scar beneath his left eye. You grew into the sort of man everyone warned me you might become. And you became the sort of woman who enters dangerous buildings without permission. A hint of sadness touched her face. You remember me? Min-jae's expression remained hard. I remember everyone who abandoned me. Grace absorbed the accusation without defending herself. Instead, she removed a second photograph. This one showed a warehouse near Incheon Harbor. Children's faces were visible behind a barred window. That building belongs to a company controlled by your uncle, she said. Your trucks are moving children through it. I don't deal in children. Someone using your name does. Min-jae rose from his chair. His organization smuggled luxury goods, controlled underground gambling, and collected protection payments. He had never pretended to be innocent, but there were lines he did not permit anyone beneath him to cross. Children were one of them. My uncle retired years ago. Grace looked directly at him. No, Min-jae. He allowed you to sit in his chair, while he built something worse beneath it. Min-jae ordered his security team to investigate the warehouse. They returned 12 hours later and reported that it was empty. No children, no barred rooms, no illegal activity. Chairman Kang arrived shortly afterward. He looked at Grace's photographs and laughed. She is manipulating you. Why? Because journalists need monsters, and you have spent years making yourself look like one. Dae-hyun claimed the photographs had been altered. He reminded Min-jae that Grace had abandoned him once before, and suggested she had returned because she wanted money. Min-jae wanted to dismiss her accusation, but one detail stopped him. The blanket wrapped around the smallest child in Grace's photograph carried the emblem of the same orphanage where Min-jae had been imprisoned. That night, he went to Grace's apartment without guards. An 8-year-old girl opened the door. She looked at his black suit, then at the men waiting beside the elevator. You look like a funeral, she said. Min-jae stared at her. Grace appeared behind the girl. Zara, this is Kang Min-jae. Zara examined him more carefully. The dangerous man. The complicated man. That usually means dangerous. Min-jae should have been offended. Instead, something about Zara's fearless expression almost made him smile. Grace sent her to prepare for bed. A few minutes later, her voice floated from the bedroom as she sang the same African lullaby Min-jae had heard in the orphanage basement. He turned toward the sound. You taught it to her. My mother taught it to me. I sing it whenever Zara is afraid. You sang it to me. Grace became still. Yes. You never returned. I did return. Min-jae looked at her sharply. Grace explained that she had contacted the police after finding him in the basement. When she returned with investigators, Min-jae was gone. The orphanage owner claimed a relative had collected him. I searched for you, she said. Your uncle threatened to have me deported if I continued asking questions. When I refused, someone attacked me outside my university residence. I spent 2 weeks in the hospital. My uncle said you took money. Your uncle lied. Min-jae looked toward Zara's bedroom. For 31 years, he had built his life around an abandonment that never happened. Grace placed a small recorder on the table. I have been investigating your uncle for 14 months. The orphanage never closed. It changed names, moved locations, and became part of a trafficking route. Why come to me? Because your signature appears on the companies moving the children. Min-jae's jaw tightened. And because Grace continued, I still believe the boy I found in that basement exists somewhere inside the man sitting in front of me. Min-jae agreed to help her, but only in secret. For the next 3 weeks, they traced vehicles, compared company records, and identified 2 facilities where children were being held. Grace recorded everything and kept copies in separate locations. Min-jae discovered that his uncle had used legitimate shipping routes to hide the operation. Several of Min-jae's trusted men were involved. Then Grace found something worse. The payments began before Min-jae inherited the organization. His uncle had been trafficking children for decades. The orphanage where Grace met Min-jae had been one of his earliest suppliers. Grace called Min-jae shortly before midnight. I found the original records, she whispered. Your uncle didn't rescue you from that orphanage. He owned it. Min-jae stood inside his office, unable to answer. He selected children with no relatives. Grace continued. Some were moved overseas. Others disappeared. You survived because he discovered who your father was. A door opened in the background. Grace stopped speaking. Grace, I'm sending Zara somewhere safe. What happened? They know I found the records. Tell me where you are. Before Grace could answer, Min-jae heard a man's voice behind her. Chairman Kang Dae-hyun. The call ended. Min-jae drove toward Grace's apartment with 4 vehicles behind him. He never reached it. A truck struck the lead car at an intersection. Gunmen emerged before the wreckage stopped moving. Bullets shattered Min-jae's windows. 3 of his men died protecting him. A bullet entered beneath his collarbone, and the world disappeared in red light and broken glass. Min-jae awakened 2 days later, with his uncle seated beside his hospital bed. Dae-hyun placed Grace's blood-stained press card on the blanket. She betrayed you, he said. She gave your enemies your location. Now she is dead. Min-jae tried to speak, but all he could remember was Grace singing in the basement and promising she would return. Something inside him closed. He turned his face toward the window. And for the next 183 days, Kang Min-jae did not speak again. Back in the rehabilitation room, Zara pushed the 3 recordings toward him. Min-jae wrote another question. When did your mother give these to you? She didn't, Zara answered. They arrived in the mail. Min-jae looked up. Zara removed the first recording from its envelope and showed him the postal stamp. My mother was declared dead on a Tuesday, she said, but this was mailed 3 days later. Min-jae stared at the date. If the stamp was genuine, Grace had survived the night his uncle claimed she died. Zara placed her hand over the music player. My mother may still be alive. Then she looked toward the locked door behind them. But if your uncle discovers I found you, I don't think either of us will stay alive long enough to find her. Min-jae looked from the postal stamp to the security camera mounted above the rehabilitation room door. For 6 months, his uncle had controlled everything around him. The doctors permitted to treat him, the guards outside his room, the news reports shown on his television, and the people allowed to visit. Zara had entered the building because a newly employed nurse believed she was delivering a message from Min-jae's attorney. Once Chairman Kang discovered who she really was, the mistake would be corrected. Min-jae picked up his notepad. Who brought you here? A taxi driver. His pen stopped. You came alone. I left a note for the woman watching me. Min-jae stared at her. Zara folded her arms. She was going to say no. He wrote more forcefully. She was supposed to say no. You are 8 years old, and you are 38, but you have spent 6 months refusing to speak. Min-jae slowly lowered the pen. Zara pointed at the 3 recordings. I did not come here, so you could lecture me without using your voice. Are you going to help find my mother or not? There was something painfully familiar in the way she lifted her chin. Grace had looked at him the same way whenever he attempted to frighten her into silence. Min-jae reached for the telephone beside his bed. He could have called his uncle's guards, but he no longer knew which of them could be trusted. Instead, he wrote a name, Detective Han Ji-won. Call her. Tell her Kang Min-jae is ready to cooperate. Zara read the message twice. The detective who said, you probably killed my mother? Min-jae nodded. She doesn't like you. He added another line. That is why we can trust her. Detective Han arrived 40 minutes later. She was a sharp-eyed woman in her early 40s who had spent years investigating Min-jae's organization. She had accused him of bribery, smuggling, and ordering acts of violence, but she had never been able to prove enough to imprison him. She entered the room expecting a trick. Then she saw Zara. What is a child doing here? Zara pointed at Min-jae, trying to make a stubborn man useful. Han looked between them. I see the 2 of you are getting along. Min-jae turned the notepad toward her. Grace may be alive. The humor left Han's face. Zara showed her the envelopes. Han examined the postal marks, the music player, and Grace's handwritten label. These could have been mailed by anyone. My mother made the recordings, Zara insisted. I believe the voice may belong to her. That does not prove she sent them. Zara's expression tightened. You're saying someone copied her voice? I'm saying that people connected to Kang Min-jae use lies as weapons. She looked directly at him. And sometimes they use children to deliver them. Min-jae accepted the accusation without reacting. Han was right to be suspicious. His world had taught her to be. He wrote, "Take Zara somewhere safe. Examine the recordings without notifying my uncle." Han read it. Chairman Kang pays for this facility. He will discover that she came here. Min-jae underlined the final sentence. Then move quickly. Detective Han brought Zara to an unused interview room at a police training center. She trusted few officers with the evidence, so she contacted a forensic audio specialist who had no known connection to Min-jae's organization. Min-jae was transferred under police supervision several hours later. It was the first time he had left his hospital room since learning to walk again. As he entered the interview room, Zara sat beside the specialist, wearing headphones much too large for her head. Grace's first Lullaby appeared as a pattern of sound waves across the computer screen. The specialist removed his own headphones. The recordings are genuine. They were made on different devices, and in at least 3 locations. Detective Han leaned toward the screen. Can you determine when? The file information was removed, but background sounds may help. Zara lifted one side of her headphones. That is what my mother said. Each song leads to the next place. They played the second recording. Grace's voice filled the room, gentle and controlled. Beneath the lullaby came the faint rhythm of machinery, a distant announcement, and a series of metallic chimes. Zara closed her eyes. Min-jae watched her listening, not to the song but through it. That announcement is from a train station, Han said. The specialist isolated the sound and increased its volume. A distorted female voice mentioned a platform number. The station name remained buried beneath Grace's singing. Zara suddenly pointed at the screen. Play the bells again. The specialist repeated the metallic chimes. My mother took me there last year. She said, those aren't station bells. They come from a church beside the railway. Min-jae wrote, which church? I don't remember the name. There was a red door and a statue with one hand missing. Detective Han searched photographs of churches near railway stations. After several minutes, Zara identified a small Catholic church outside Incheon. Han sent 2 trusted officers to investigate. They found no sign of Grace, but behind a loose stone beneath the church steps, they discovered another envelope addressed to Zara. Inside was a key, a memory card, and a handwritten sentence. The place where songs cross the ocean. The memory card contained photographs of shipping containers. Several children stood behind a wire fence while men wearing uniforms loaded supplies nearby. One of the men had worked for Min-jae for 11 years. Min-jae stared at the image. He had promoted that man, trusted him with warehouses, and allowed him to recruit security personnel across the company. Detective Han noticed his reaction. You know him. Min-jae wrote the man's name and 3 addresses associated with him. Are you finally going to admit that your organization moved these children? He pressed the pen so hard that its tip tore through the paper. My organization did. I did not know. Han's voice remained cold. You signed the company documents. Your trucks crossed the ports. Whether you personally saw the children or not, your power made it possible. Min-jae did not defend himself. Zara looked at him from across the table. Did you hurt children? He shook his head immediately. But you hurt other people? Min-jae's hand remained above the notepad. There were answers he could have written to make himself appear better. He could explain his rules, blame his uncle, or describe the crimes he had forbidden. Instead, he wrote, "Yes. Zara, read the word. Did my mother know? Yes. And she still trusted you." Min-jae looked toward Grace's photograph on the computer. He wrote more slowly. "She trusted that I could choose differently." Zara turned away from him. That isn't the same as being good. No enemy had ever spoken to Min-jae with such simple accuracy. He nodded. By evening, Detective Han traced the key to a locker inside an abandoned passenger terminal at Incheon Harbor. The locker contained a second music player, copies of financial statements, and 12 children's identification photographs. Each child had entered South Korea legally through cultural or educational programs. According to official records, all 12 had returned to their home countries. Grace's photographs proved otherwise. The money funding the operation came through a charitable foundation controlled by Chairman Kang. Han spread the documents across the table. He used donations to bring the children into the country. Once they arrived, their identities were altered, and the charities reported that they had returned home. Min-jae studied the payment dates. Some transactions had been authorized through his office. He recognized his digital signature, but not the account numbers beneath it. His uncle had not merely hidden a trafficking network inside the empire. He had used Min-jae as its legal shield. Zara stood beside the table, looking at the children's photographs. "Where are they now?" Han hesitated. "We don't know." "Then we should listen to the next song." The third recording began with the same lullaby, but Grace's voice sounded weaker. She paused between certain lines as though struggling to breathe. In the background, water struck metal at regular intervals. A ship horn sounded, followed by the cry of market vendors and the rumbling engine of a departing truck. Then Grace stopped singing. "Zara," she whispered, "if you are listening, remember what I told you about courage. Being brave does not mean walking into danger alone. It means knowing who deserves to stand beside you." Zara's eyes filled with tears. Grace continued, "Min-jae, the children are moved whenever the church bell rings 9 times. Follow the vehicles, but do not trust the police officer wearing the silver crane." The recording ended. Detective Han became still. The silver crane was the insignia of her investigative division. Someone inside her own unit was working for Chairman Kang. She collected the evidence immediately. "We leave separately. I will place Zara under protection outside Seoul." Zara looked at Min-jae. "What about him?" "He returns to the rehabilitation center." "No, Zara, this is not a discussion. If his uncle controls the building, he isn't safe there." Min-jae wrote, "She is right." Han almost laughed. "You have known her for 1 day, and she already has you taking orders." He added, "Move me to police custody. Do not record the transfer electronically." Han arranged for Min-jae to be taken to a secure medical wing under a false name. Zara was placed with a retired police officer whom Han trusted. Before they separated, Zara approached Min-jae with one of Grace's recordings. "My mother must have believed you would help me." Min-jae nodded. "I don't believe you yet." He nodded again. Zara placed the recording in his palm. "But I think she wanted me to give you a chance." For the first time in 6 months, Min-jae attempted to speak. Air moved through his throat, but the word remained trapped. Zara waited without looking away. Min-jae finally picked up his notepad. "I will find her." "You can't promise that." He crossed out the sentence and tried again. "I will not stop looking." Zara read it and nodded. "That promise is better." Over the next 5 days, Detective Han investigated the vehicles appearing in Grace's photographs. They belonged to a food distribution company that delivered supplies to schools, churches, and shelters. At precisely 9 o'clock every Thursday night, 3 trucks left a storage facility near the church Zara identified. Han secretly followed one of them to an abandoned seafood processing plant near the coast. Thermal cameras revealed more than 20 people inside. Several appeared to be children. Min-jae studied the images in his secure room. A section of the building matched a place he remembered from childhood. The same peeling green walls. The same narrow windows positioned too high for a child to reach. His uncle had moved the orphanage's operation beneath the processing plant. Detective Han prepared a rescue team, but Min-jae warned her that someone in her division would alert Chairman Kang. Han showed the thermal images only to 4 officers she trusted. She gave each officer a different proposed time for the raid. Within 3 hours, the children were moved. The false time given to one officer had been leaked. Detective Han arrested him before midnight. On his phone, she found messages from Chairman Kang's personal secretary. The final message had been sent minutes earlier. The girl has the remaining recording. Retrieve her before Min-jae learns what happened to Grace. Han called the retired officer protecting Zara. No answer. She called again. The line connected, but nobody spoke. Then a man's voice came through. Detective Han, Chairman Kang would like his nephew to stop investigating matters that do not concern him. Where is Zara? She is safe for the moment. If anyone harms that child, that depends on Kang Min-jae. The call ended. Han raced to the safe house. The front door was open. The retired officer lay unconscious in the hallway, but he was still breathing. Zara was gone. On the kitchen floor, Han found the yellow backpack she had been carrying when she entered Min-jae's hospital room. Grace's final recording was missing. Han returned to the secure medical wing shortly before dawn. Min-jae knew something was wrong the moment she entered without Zara. Han placed the yellow backpack on the table. Your uncle took her. Min-jae stared at the bag. The pen slipped from his fingers. For 6 months, doctors, detectives, and attorneys had tried to make him speak. Nothing had reached the place where he buried his voice. But now, somewhere in Seoul, the 8-year-old daughter of the woman who once saved him was trapped with the man who had destroyed his childhood. Min-jae gripped the edge of the table. His chest rose sharply. When he opened his mouth, the first sound emerged broken and raw, but it was unmistakably a voice. Zara. Detective Han froze. Min-jae raised his head, and the silence that had imprisoned him for 183 days finally shattered. Where did he take her? Detective Han stared at Min-jae. His voice was weak and rough, but after 183 days of silence, hearing it changed the atmosphere in the room. Min-jae stood, ignoring the pain beneath his collarbone. Where is Zara? We don't know yet. Then find out. Han's expression hardened. You do not command me. Min-jae looked at Zara's abandoned backpack. No, but you need what I know. Han placed both hands on the table. And what exactly do you know? My uncle never improvises. If he took Zara, he chose a location connected to her mother's investigation. Somewhere the child can be used to force Grace out of hiding. You believe Grace is still alive. Dae-hyun does. Min-jae picked up the photograph of the abandoned processing plant. He moved the children before your team arrived, but he would not move them far. Transporting 20 children through the city creates too many witnesses. Han pointed toward the coastal highway. We checked every warehouse within 10 kilometers. You checked the properties registered to his companies. What else should we have checked? Min-jae circled a small building beside the processing plant. The orphanage chapel. According to public records, the chapel had been demolished 24 years earlier. Min-jae knew that was a lie because his uncle once took him beneath it. There was an underground passage connecting the chapel to the coast. As a child, Min-jae believed it was an emergency shelter. Now, he understood it had been used to move children without allowing them to be seen from the road. Detective Han summoned the 3 officers she still trusted. Min-jae stopped her before she sent the location electronically. My uncle has people outside your division. If you place the address in the system, he will know. Then how do you suggest we organize a rescue? We don't give everyone the same destination. Han understood. Each supporting police unit received coordinates for a different coastal location. Only Han and her 3 trusted officers knew about the chapel. Min-jae insisted on accompanying them. You were shot 6 months ago, Han said. You can barely stand for 10 minutes. I know the tunnels. You can draw a map. The layout changed whenever my uncle moved the children. Some passages were designed to trap anyone who entered without guidance. Han looked toward the armed officer beside the door. If he attempts to escape, arrest him. Min-jae did not object. For most of his life, he had traveled through Seoul surrounded by men willing to kill on his command. Now he entered a police vehicle with no weapon and an officer seated beside him. It was the first honest journey he had made in years. Rain covered the coast when they arrived. The abandoned chapel stood beyond a line of dying trees. Its roof had partially collapsed, and vines covered the stone walls. Nothing suggested that anyone had entered for decades. Min-jae approached the broken altar. He knelt and pressed his palm against a faded carving of a crane. A section of the floor shifted. Detective Han looked at him. The same crane from your division? My uncle uses it to mark everyone he owns. Beneath the altar, narrow steps descended into darkness. They found the first guard before reaching the bottom. Han's officers restrained him before he could raise an alarm. The passage beyond him divided in 3 directions. Min-jae closed his eyes and listened. Water moved through the tunnel to their right. A generator vibrated somewhere to their left. Straight ahead, faintly, a child was crying. He opened his eyes. That way. The passage led to a rusted steel door. Behind it, 23 children sat inside a room containing thin mattresses and empty food containers. Several lifted their hands to shield their faces when the officers entered. Detective Han lowered her weapon. We are police officers. You're safe now. The children did not move. They had heard promises before. Then a boy near the back whispered, "The African girl." Min-jae stepped forward. "Where is she?" A man took her below. Min-jae turned toward another steel door. Han caught his arm. "We go together." Waiting gives him time to move her. Running ahead gives him another hostage. She was right. Min-jae hated her for being right. They left 2 officers with the children and descended another flight of stairs. Grace's lullaby drifted upward through the passage. It was not being sung. Someone was playing Zara's final recording. They found her inside a former storage room, seated beneath a single hanging light. Her wrists were bound in front of her, but she was not visibly injured. Chairman Kang Dae-hyun stood behind her with a gun. Zara looked at Min-jae. "You spoke." Dae-hyun's expression changed. For 6 months, he had visited his nephew without receiving a word. Now, an 8-year-old girl had accomplished what threats, doctors, and interrogations could not. "This child has always been inconvenient," Dae-hyun said, "just like her mother. Let her go." Min-jae's voice cracked, but he did not look away. "You lost your voice for half a year, and those are the first words you choose to give me? You never wanted my voice. You wanted my obedience." Dae-hyun pressed the gun against Zara's shoulder. "I rescued you from that orphanage. You owned it. I gave you a name, an education, and an empire. You gave me your crimes and taught me to call them inheritance." Dae-hyun smiled without warmth. "And you accepted them." Min-jae could not deny it. The smuggling, bribery, and violence had not been forced upon him. His uncle shaped him, but Min-jae had made his own choices. I did, he admitted. That ends now. Detective Han entered behind him, with her weapon raised. Drop the gun, Chairman Kang. Dae-hyun dragged Zara toward a second passage. If I release her, you will arrest me. Yes, Han answered. At least you are honest. Zara suddenly stamped on his foot. The movement startled him long enough for her to twist away. Min-jae crossed the room before Dae-hyun could recover. A gunshot struck the wall. Min-jae pulled Zara to the floor and covered her with his body, while Han fired at the ceiling above Dae-hyun. Stone fragments fell around him. Dae-hyun disappeared through the second passage. Han ran after him, but an explosion shook the tunnel. Part of the ceiling collapsed, blocking the exit. Min-jae pushed himself upright. Blood spread across his shirt, where the movement had reopened his old wound. Zara stared at it. You're hurt. I have been hurt before. That doesn't make it acceptable. Even there, surrounded by dust and shattered stone, she sounded like Grace. Min-jae untied her wrists. Did he touch you? He kept asking where I hid the other recordings. Did you tell him? I told him I swallowed them. Min-jae looked at her. Zara shrugged. He didn't believe me, but he stopped searching my pockets. She reached inside her sock and removed the final recording. Detective Han returned to the room. The tunnel leads to the coast. He had a boat waiting. He escaped? Zara asked. For now. A low sound came from behind the far wall. At first, Min-jae assumed it was water moving through the pipes. Then he heard 3 deliberate knocks. He approached the wall and pressed his ear against it. The knocking came again. Han's officers found a metal panel concealed behind a storage shelf. Beyond it was a narrow room without windows. A woman lay on the floor. Her natural curls had been cut unevenly. Bruises covered her arms, and one ankle was secured to a pipe. But she was breathing. Mother. Zara ran past the officers. Grace's eyes opened at the sound of her daughter's voice. For a moment, she appeared unable to understand what she was seeing. Then Zara fell beside her, and Grace wrapped both arms around the child. Min-jae remained near the doorway. He had imagined finding Grace countless times during the past 6 months. In some versions, she accused him of betraying her. In others, she refused to look at him. He had never imagined she would smile. You listen to the song, she whispered. Min-jae stepped closer. I'm sorry. Grace studied him. You found your voice. Zara found it. Paramedics carried Grace from the tunnel while the rescued children were taken to hospitals. Detective Han remained behind to collect documents from the underground rooms. They found medical files, altered passports, and payment records covering more than 20 years. The names of police officers, immigration officials, and charity directors appeared throughout the documents. Min-jae's name appeared too. Even if he had not known the children were being trafficked, companies under his control had transported them. Money from his businesses had maintained the facilities. Grace was treated under police protection. Zara refused to leave her bedside. Min-jae waited in the corridor while a doctor closed the wound beneath his collarbone. When he attempted to enter Grace's room, Detective Han blocked the door. She needs rest. I need to speak to her. You need to decide whether you are a witness or a suspect. Min-jae looked through the glass. Zara sat beside her mother, holding her hand. What did you find? Enough to prove your uncle controlled the trafficking operation. We also found financial records connecting your companies to smuggling, illegal gambling, and payments to public officials. Those operations were mine. Han studied him. You understand what happens if you admit that. Yes. You could help us prosecute your uncle without confessing to everything. Your attorney will argue that Dae-hyun manipulated the companies without your knowledge. He did manipulate the trafficking accounts, then remained silent about the rest. Min-jae looked at her. For 6 months, silence had protected his uncle. For years, silence had protected the organization. He would not allow it to protect him now. Grace regained enough strength to speak with investigators the following afternoon. She explained that Dae-hyun captured her after discovering she possessed the original orphanage ledgers. He kept her alive because several files were encrypted, and only she knew the password. He wanted the recordings, she said. He believed I named every official involved. Did you? Han asked. Not directly. I recorded the sounds around the locations. If someone intercepted the songs, they would hear a mother comforting her child. Zara would hear the clues. Grace looked toward Min-jae, and Min-jae would remember where the first song began. Min-jae lowered his eyes. I should have believed you when you came to my office. You should have investigated your own empire long before I arrived. Her answer was painful because it was true. Zara watched them both. Are you angry with him? Grace did not offer her daughter a comforting lie. Yes. Do you hate him? No. Anger and hatred are not the same thing. Min-jae turned toward the window. Grace's voice softened. I believed you could choose differently. Min-jae, I still do, but choosing differently will cost you something. Before he could respond, Detective Han entered with urgent news. Chairman Kang had released a video to every major news station in Seoul. In it, Dae-hyun accused Min-jae of controlling the trafficking network. He claimed Grace had been Min-jae's accomplice and that the kidnapping had been staged to destroy him. He also released genuine records of Min-jae's past crimes. The country quickly divided between those who believed Dae-hyun and those who believed Min-jae had rescued the children only to protect himself. Min-jae's attorney arrived that evening. The trafficking evidence against your uncle is strong, he said, but if you admit responsibility for the other operations, you will go to prison. For how long? Possibly 15 years. Zara's face changed. Grace held her daughter closer. The attorney continued, we can separate you from the companies. We can blame the illegal accounts on your uncle. With the right testimony, you could walk away from all of it. Min-jae looked at the red music player resting beside Grace's hospital bed. His entire life had been constructed from carefully selected truths. He admitted the crimes that made him look powerful and denied the ones that made him look cruel. He called himself honorable because there were certain lines he refused to cross. But innocent people had suffered beneath his name, whether he saw them or not. Zara approached him. If you go to prison, who will protect us? Min-jae knelt despite the pain in his shoulder. Detective Han will protect you. That isn't what I asked. He looked into her frightened eyes. I spent my life believing protection meant having enough power to make everyone afraid. Your mother showed me that I was wrong. Then what does it mean? It means telling the truth before someone else is hurt by your silence. Zara's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. The following morning, Min-jae called Detective Han, his attorney, and an independent prosecutor into Grace's hospital room. He placed his black notepad on the table. The first pages contained the words he had used throughout his 6 months of silence. Leave. No questions. Turn off the television. Min-jae tore those pages out. Then he placed a list of private accounts, hidden ledgers, and names on the table. This is every operation I controlled, he said. My uncle built the trafficking network, but I built the empire that protected it. His attorney attempted to interrupt him. Min-jae continued, I will testify against Chairman Kang. The prosecutor studied the list. In exchange for immunity? No. The room became silent. Min-jae looked at Grace and Zara. I will tell the truth about him. Then he pushed the complete confession across the table. And I will tell the truth about myself. 3 days after Kang Min-jae delivered his confession, Seoul awakened to the largest organized crime investigation in the country's recent history. Police raided 16 businesses connected to his organization. Investigators seized financial records, altered passports, and computers containing the identities of officials who had protected Chairman Kang Dae-hyun's trafficking network. 7 police officers were arrested. 2 immigration officials were suspended. 3 directors of international charities were taken into custody before they could leave the country. But Chairman Kang remained missing. Detective Han believed he was preparing to escape by sea. His accounts had been frozen, his allies were being arrested, and the empire he spent decades building was collapsing. A national appeal hearing was scheduled to determine whether the recovered evidence could be used against him. Min-jae would be the prosecution's central witness. On the morning of the hearing, he stood before a mirror inside a courthouse holding room. He wore a plain black suit without a tie. The scar beneath his left eye remained visible, and months of isolation had left him thinner than the feared Mafia boss who once controlled entire rooms without raising his voice. His attorney adjusted the files on the table. You still have time to change your statement. No, the prosecution can convict your uncle with the documents recovered from the chapel. You don't need to confess to crimes they cannot prove. They can prove them now, because you gave them the evidence. Min-jae looked at him. If I remove my crimes from the truth, I am doing exactly what my uncle did. The attorney lowered his voice. Your cooperation may reduce your sentence, but it will not erase it. It shouldn't. A knock sounded at the door. Zara entered with Grace and Detective Han. Grace walked with a cane because of the damage to her ankle. Although the bruises on her face had faded, the months of captivity remained visible in the careful way she moved. Zara wore a yellow dress beneath a dark blue coat. The scratched red music player hung from a cord around her neck. Min-jae looked at it. You brought the recording? Zara held it protectively. You forgot the most important part. What part? The song. She pressed the music player into his hand. You might need to remember who you were before your uncle taught you to be afraid. Min-jae closed his fingers around it. Are you frightened? Zara asked. Yes. She appeared surprised. The silent wolf admits he's afraid. I'm attempting to become a more honest wolf. Zara smiled for the first time since the rescue. Grace watched their exchange. You don't have to be fearless today, she told him. You only have to finish telling the truth. The courtroom was filled with reporters, victims' families, and representatives from several foreign embassies. Min-jae took the witness stand. The prosecutor began with the trafficking network. Min-jae explained how his uncle used orphanages and charities to identify vulnerable children. Companies controlled by Min-jae then transported them through legitimate shipping routes. Did you know children were being moved through your businesses? The prosecutor asked. No. Are you asking this court to believe you were entirely innocent? No. A murmur spread through the courtroom. Min-jae continued. I did not know about the children because I chose not to examine the parts of my organization that remained profitable. I allowed men I considered loyal to operate without oversight. My ignorance was convenient, and innocent people paid for it. He then admitted to smuggling, bribery, illegal gambling, and ordering violence against rival criminals. His attorney closed his eyes. Grace did not look away. The prosecutor displayed a photograph of the underground room where the children were found. Did you order these children to be imprisoned? No. Did you authorize their sale or transfer? No. Who controlled that operation? Chairman Kang Dae-hyun. A voice rose from the back of the courtroom. He is lying. Everyone turned. Chairman Kang stood near the entrance, surrounded by 4 men wearing dark suits. He had not come to surrender. He had come because every major television station was broadcasting the hearing. Dae-hyun wanted the country to watch him destroy his nephew's credibility. Detective Han moved toward him, but he raised both hands. "I am here voluntarily." He carried a folder containing documents that appeared to show Min-jae approving payments to the trafficking facilities. Dae-hyun's attorney argued that Min-jae had created the secret network and was now blaming the uncle who raised him. The judge permitted Dae-hyun to testify after officers searched and detained the men accompanying him. From the witness stand, Dae-hyun presented himself as a retired businessman betrayed by the nephew he treated as a son. "I rescued Min-jae from a corrupt orphanage," he said. "I gave him everything, but power changed him." Min-jae watched silently. Years earlier, those words would have filled him with doubt. Now, he recognized the method behind them. His uncle always mixed one truth with several lies. Dae-hyun had given him everything except freedom. The prosecutor showed him photographs from the underground facility. Dae-hyun claimed he had never visited it. She showed him the charitable foundation's accounts. He blamed corrupt employees. She presented messages recovered from the officer wearing the silver crane. Dae-hyun insisted his secretary sent them without authorization. Every piece of evidence belonged to someone else. Every victim had misunderstood him. Every crime had occurred beneath his name, without his knowledge. Min-jae saw what he might have become if Grace and Zara had never forced him to examine his own life. Then Grace was called to testify. She described finding Min-jae inside the orphanage basement 31 years earlier. She explained how Dae-hyun threatened her after she returned with investigators, and how the chairman's men attacked her outside her university residence. Dae-hyun's attorney challenged her account. "You expect this court to rely on memories from more than 3 decades ago." "No," Grace answered. "I expect the court to rely on the recordings." The attorney smiled. "Songs recorded on portable devices do not prove who controlled a criminal network. Not the lullabies." Grace turned toward Detective Han. "The recording from the orphanage basement." Detective Han connected Zara's music player to the courtroom's audio system. Until that moment, everyone believed the first file contained only Grace singing to a frightened 7-year-old Min-jae. A forensic specialist had discovered another voice buried beneath the thunder. The recording began. Young Grace could be heard singing the African lullaby. Rain struck the basement window. A child cried softly against her chest. Then footsteps approached the locked door. A younger version of Chairman Kang's voice sounded in the corridor. "Move the other children before the investigators return." Another man asked, "What about the Kong boy?" "Keep him. His father's accounts are worth more than the child." "And the African volunteer?" "Pay her. If she refuses, frighten her until she leaves Korea." The courtroom became completely silent. Dae-hyun's confidence disappeared. The recording continued. "The children arriving next month should be sent through the harbor. Change the orphanage's name after the transfer." Detective Han stopped the file. The recording did not merely connect Dae-hyun to Grace's attack. It proved that he controlled the trafficking operation before Min-jae was old enough to understand what it was. Dae-hyun stood abruptly. This recording was fabricated. The forensic specialist testified that the file had remained on the original device, protected beneath decades of copied audio. Its age, background frequencies, and magnetic degradation were consistent with a recording made 31 years earlier. Dae-hyun moved toward the courtroom exit. Officers blocked him. For the first time, the man who built his power by controlling every exit discovered that there was nowhere left to go. As Detective Han placed him under arrest, Dae-hyun looked at Min-jae. "You would destroy your own family for that woman." Min-jae rose. "No, You destroyed this family long before she returned. I made you powerful. You made me afraid. Daehyun's face twisted. And what are you without the empire I gave you? Min-jae looked toward Grace and Zara. For most of his life, he would not have known how to answer. Now he did. Someone who can finally choose what he becomes next. Chairman Kang was taken from the courtroom. The investigation that followed lasted 7 months. 29 children were reunited with surviving relatives. Others entered carefully monitored foster programs while authorities searched for their families. Money seized from Min-jae's organization was placed in a compensation fund for the victims. Properties once used to hide illegal operations were sold, and the proceeds supported international efforts against child trafficking. Chairman Kang was convicted of kidnapping, trafficking, conspiracy, attempted murder, and corruption. He would spend the remainder of his life in prison. Min-jae was also convicted. His cooperation, confession, and role in rescuing the children reduced his sentence, but they did not erase the crimes he committed. The judge sentenced him to 7 years. Before officers took him away, Min-jae turned toward Zara. She was crying, but she did not ask him to escape the consequences. Instead, she lifted the music player. I'll keep the songs safe. Min-jae nodded. And I'll keep visiting, she added. But you have to speak when I come. I will. No disappearing into silence. No disappearing into silence. Grace stood beside her daughter. Forgiveness had not arrived all at once. It could not. There were too many wounds, too many choices, and too many people affected by the empire Min-jae helped control. But when Min-jae met her eyes, Grace gave him a small nod. It was not absolution. It was permission to keep changing. During his imprisonment, Min-jae testified in 4 additional corruption trials. He helped investigators identify hidden routes and accounts, and he surrendered the remainder of his personal fortune to the victims' fund. Grace and Zara visited twice each month. Zara brought school reports, drawings, and rules written on colored cards. Her first rule was, people who promise to change must practice when nobody is watching. Her second was, adults are not allowed to pretend they understand mathematics if they don't. Min-jae admitted that the second rule had been created after he incorrectly solved one of her homework questions. Years passed. Zara grew taller. Grace's hair gained more silver. Min-jae's voice became stronger, although it always softened whenever Zara asked him about the frightened child he once was. He served 5 years before being released under strict supervision because of his continued cooperation. Grace and Zara waited outside the prison. There were no reporters, expensive vehicles, or armed men. Only Grace, Zara, and a red music player that had been repaired so many times that none of its original buttons matched. Zara was 13 now. She looked at Min-jae's plain clothes and small bag. You still look like a funeral. Min-jae smiled. And you still insult people before greeting them. It keeps conversations honest. Grace stepped forward. Welcome back, Min-jae. Those 3 words meant more than the empire he had lost. 2 years later, a refuge for exploited children opened on the former site of the orphanage where Grace first found him. It was named the Mensah House of New Beginnings. Grace served as its director. Detective Han led its legal protection program. Min-jae managed its finances under independent supervision and never allowed his name to appear on the building. On the opening night, a storm moved across Seoul. Thunder shook the windows. One frightened little boy hid beneath a table in the recreation room. Min-jae crouched several feet away, uncertain how to comfort him. Zara entered carrying a blanket. She sat beside the child and began singing her mother's African lullaby. The boy slowly emerged. Min-jae listened from the floor. The song had once reached him through a locked basement door. Decades later, It reached him through 6 months of silence. It carried Grace's courage, Zara's faith, and the truth his uncle could not bury. Zara looked at Min-jae and motioned for him to join her. His singing was terrible. The frightened boy laughed. Grace stood in the doorway, smiling as Min-jae continued anyway. He had once believed power meant making an entire room fall silent. Now he understood that real strength was creating a place where frightened people felt safe enough to use their voices. And the little girl who broke the silent wolf's silence did not save him by pretending he was innocent. She saved him by reminding him that it was never too late to tell the truth, and never too late to become someone worthy of the song that once comforted him. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel, share it with someone who believes people can change, and tell us in the comments, would you have given Kang Min-jae a second chance after learning the truth about his past?